but we'll be back. We'll be back in February when we'll be talking about disinformation. Before I introduce tonight's guest, I just want to say a word about the League of Women Voters of Maryland. When I talk about the League, I like to emphasize that we're one organization where you can actively participate. There's so many organizations today that just want your money. I know we all get those letters asking for money every day in the mail. Well, we want that too, but more than that, we want you to join the League and get involved. So there's many ways to participate, both through your local league and the state. So check us out on the website. And if you aren't already a member, please consider joining. We'll put links in the chat to where you can join or find out more about the League. So tonight, we're very pleased to have a distinguished panel of experts on election security. Pamela Smith is the president and CEO of Verified Voting. Verified Voting is a nonpartisan organization that focuses on the role of technology in the administration of elections, and it promotes policies and practices that mitigate risk. Pamela is a nationally recognized expert on election security and administration. Her work focuses on making voting systems resilient, championing post-election audits, and speaking to the public about trustworthy elections. In addition to her work leading the organization, she advises election officials and voting right partners, advocates for secure and fair elections, and supports election officials on the ground. Susan Greenhalgh is Senior Advisor on Election Security for Free Speech for People. Free Speech for People is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that does a number of things, from challenging policies that restrict voting access to providing free and fair elections. And they also work to make sure that voting systems are reliable and secure, and advocate for campaign finance reform. Susan has previously served as Vice President of Programs at Verified Voting and at the National Election Defense Coalition. Her work includes advocating for secure election protocols, paper ballot voting systems, and post-election audits. She is an expert on election security and has been invited to testify before the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, and she writes frequently on voting issues. Both Pamela and Susan have over 20 years each of working on election security. Our moderator tonight is Jared DeMarinis. He is the Maryland State Administrator of Elections and has been in that position since 2023. The State Board of Election works with the County Board of Election to ensure compliance with state and federal election laws. Previously, he served for 18 years as Director of Candidacy and Campaign Finance for the Maryland State Board of Election. In that role, he took a proactive role to election administration and campaign finance that led Maryland to adopt policies that include new technologies, the use of new technologies by campaigns. Jared has served as an elected election observer in various countries such as Estonia, North Macedonia, and Armenia, and has written a book on the history of the Electoral College in Maryland. So before we start, please put your questions in chat. We will have a question and answer session towards the end of the panel discussion. And Nikki Tyree, who is our executive director, will moderate the question and answer session. Okay, so questions can be directed to any of the panelists. All right, let's get started, and thank you very much for attending. I'm going to turn it over to our panelist.
Thank you, Gail, and thank you, Nikki, for putting together this panel here. So I want to start off this a little bit as we go into election security, and it kind of touches on one of your other panels in the near future here about mis and disinformation here. I think election security is surrounded by a lot of mis and disinformation. And I just wanted to kind of like maybe we can kind of talk about that a little bit before we get into the meats of the matter of our questions here. So I think what are your thoughts on how to handle mis and disinformation, where to get trusted information and the trusted sources about this, and how to and what is and once the other part about this is the role of the voter in receiving the corrected information as well. I think that there's an element that a voter has an obligation then to do something with this as well. So I kind of throw that over to the panel now.
Thanks, Jared. I'll jump in if that's okay. First of all, thanks for having me. I'm glad to see everyone here. This is such an important topic, and disinformation is really a key part of it. We're living in a world of artificiality. Like half of the traffic online is from bots, right? And there's a goal of that to try to persuade people. Aside from a monetary goal, there's a goal to try to persuade people to give an impression that people around you think this and not that, or they like this or not that. And it's hard to make sense out of all of it. One of the things that we tell people is there's a real human being at your elections office and they have actual information about your upcoming election. They're the ones to talk to. Real human connection and interaction is really important. We're all real humans here, so you've come to the right place to get some facts and data. And I think that knowing your election official and your election workers, who are all your neighbors, many of you have probably been poll workers, so you know that. It is just a critically important thing when it comes to elections. People can get the wrong idea about something and it gets halfway around the world before anyone has a chance to respond. So I always tell people go straight to the source. We collect a lot of data. Everything we do, we make sure it's fact-based. But it is hard to make sense out of all of this. So I appreciate this opportunity so we can talk about it.
I'll just add a little bit more that election security is tricky. Like elections are tricky. There's a lot to them. They're complex. Jared knows better than anybody here running them for Maryland. So sometimes we have to be very careful because we know there's all sorts of disinformation floating out there. Sometimes there's things on social media telling people to go to vote on the wrong day. We hear stats about vote by mail that may not be true. But to make an argument, to put forth an assertion to benefit a specific objective. But what I think is really important is trying to keep clear-eyed, fact-based, grounded information, because not everything is always so black and white. That makes it difficult, and that's where disinformation can unfortunately flourish. But I think that we are doing ourselves a better service if we're being, clear sometimes about difficult subjects as well. And so that's why I'm glad to be here participating in this conversation.
Excellent. So it kind of flows into now the overall topic about election security. And basically, the first part about this is about election systems, and we all know that in 2000, we had the, HAVA and basically Bush v. Gore, and that was a seminal moment in election administration because it really kind of cast a light upon everyone going, oh my God, like how are we all voting and why is it all crazy in different parts of the country here? And since then, there was the creation of the Election Assistance Commission, developing standards, the certification of all these systems as we move forward with it. And now I think there's other parts about this that have changed in the last decade, especially after 2016, when you saw the again with disinformation, but the rise of foreign actors now trying to interfere in the elections and casting doubt upon the systems in and of itself. So I guess right now, let's kind of talk about the current state or the past decade since the rise of social media and almost 20 plus years, 25 years plus since Hava, where we are in the election security space with the equipment and how voters can feel confident in the systems.
Shall I
Yeah.
jump in first this time? Or
Go
do you want to
ahead.
go?
No, you go.
I'll let you guys decide on how do you want to go
Yeah.
back and forth on the
I thought we
questions.
could alternate, but no,
Okay.
or we could keep it in the same order. So we have to I think one fundamental thing that we have to recognize is in most cases we're using computers to count our votes. And largely because of the Help America Vote Act, as Jared mentioned. And computers have certain inherent characteristics, which is that sometimes they're programmed by people who can make mistakes programming them. There are some other concerns about that they can be vulnerable to other interference. And so the concept grew up of evidence-based elections. Let's have evidence that the votes are being counted correctly when we talk about our computer systems. And that can be achieved by having a paper ballot that the voter ideally has marked themselves so they can see it. If they may need some assistive technology, they can mark it with a device, but that they know that their voice, the voter's voice is the most important thing that we're going to capture in an election so that we make sure the winner reflects the voice of the voters. Have that paper ballot and then use it to check the election results. And that's something that Maryland has adopted. So I'll pass it over to Pam at that. So to move to the idea of having your elections based on evidence.
Yeah, so important. In security generally, just like talking about the security of data and so on, there's this acronym that I love because it's easy to remember. It's CIA. So in all security, you need to have confidentiality of the things that need to be secret. They have to remain secret, like voters personally identifying information or how voters voted. You have to have integrity. That means that the data is secure, that Susan mentioned the possibility of errors or programming or misprogramming or any of those kinds of problems that can happen. You need to protect against those things happening and be able to prove at the end of the day that there was integrity, that it was actually reflecting the evidence, the will of the voters. And then the third piece, A, is availability. And this is something that I think is really important. Resilient elections are elections that can keep moving forward even if something goes wrong, right? On election day, it's pretty much a guarantee that somewhere something's going to go wrong. It's Murphy's Law. But can voters keep voting? Is there a way to mark a ballot even if a machine is broken down or a counting machine isn't working at that moment? And the great big benefit of having ballots that are paper, that are marked by hand by most voters, is that you have a way to keep voting even if something went wrong with some of the technology. So I think of election security as ensuring that all eligible voters can cast an effective ballot, that they're not disenfranchised along the way to voting by any problems with the technology they might come across, like a voter registration system. When they go to vote, they can use whatever check-in system that's there. It's working, it has their correct info. And once they've checked in, they're getting their ballot and it's the right ballot, it's got all the right names on it. And then they can mark it and it can be counted, and they have the chance to verify on that actual ballot that it was marked the way they intended. After that, election officials being able to use those ballots to prove that the count was right is the other half of the coin. So the paper serves both of those purposes. I'll stop there.
Well, that kind of like goes into the next one here, which is right. So now at the end of this, it's funny because I'm old enough to remember the old lever machines in a sense, right? Like, at the end here, people were just declaring, I looked at the back of the numbers there, the old lever machine, and this was the number. There was nothing about it. And I think again, since 2000 and then 2016, there has been these fundamental like shifts in election administration with the public perception of it. And one of the things that I've noticed was also post-election Now this was one of the things about talking about paper ballots and that being able to verify and being open and transparent about the process. But that's just the front part of it. Now we're also talking about the canvas part as well as auditing. And Maryland has recently changed its audits. And I think this has been something that I was extremely happy about legislatively, that we moved from to more the gold standard of audits and making sure that people can understand this. And I just wanted to take your perspective on now, a voter comes in, they voted on their paper ballot, they put it in the machine counted it, or, at one point there, and now what can they expect, or why can they trust this? Because we have now the trust but verify portion of it with the audits after the fact here, and why the current audit system that we're going to implement for the 2026 election is the best one that voters can feel the most confident about.
I love this question. We did some research recently to kind of learn how voters understood things like audits, this checking process. And we asked voters in a number of states, how did you vote? What happens after you cast your ballot? Gets counted, then what happens? And they weren't sure, right? And why would they, right? They wouldn't necessarily know, but universally, all the groups we were talking to said, I hope someone's checking to make sure that the count is right. Well, good news. We have a way to do that. And while Maryland has been doing some forms of audits, the risk limiting audit is what it's called, is a much more robust form of checking. It's of all of the kinds of audits, this is the most robust kind. And part of the reason for that is when you have an outcome, an election result that has a real wide margin, but you have a flat percentage of audit that you're going to do. You're going to count X% of the ballots to kind of compare and see if it was right. You might be doing way more counting than you need to. But if you have a margin that's very close, like a really close contest, you might not be counting nearly enough to be able to confirm that the reported results were right, or if they weren't, to find the right outcome. With a risk limiting audit, you're actually tying how much you're checking to how close the margin is. And that makes all the difference. You're able to escalate if you start to find mistakes or errors that don't agree, that could mean possibly the outcome is not right. You can add more to the process, all the way up to a full hand recount if you need to. Those are rare, but if the margin is super close, you'd probably want one of those anyway. But they're more efficient and they're more effective. And I think that's why it's such a good thing that Maryland has moved in this direction. Susan, I don't know if you
Susan,
have...
are you frozen? I can't really tell there.
Looks a little frozen.
It looks a little frozen.
Anyway, I will share a resource with the league folks after our call. I can share some risk limiting audit resources. We have a little video. It's like 90 seconds long, 80 seconds long, and it gives you sort of how this works. And it's really straightforward and simple. When we showed it to those focus groups, they're like, "Oh, I get it now." So,
and not many, and just to put not many states have adopted this risk
not
limiting.
that many yet.
Right.
So
Maryland's kind of like on the forefront of this.
Maryland is moving has moved in this direction, and I think that there's there are a handful of states that are already doing some risk limiting audits. They've been piloted in the country since about 2008, and Colorado started the first statewide risk limiting audits back in about 2017 after quite a few years of planning and testing. And Rhode Island in 2020 statewide, and then there are a number of other states that have followed suit. So some states are piloting them right now. We're working with Pennsylvania. South Carolina is going to pilot in 2026. So there's a number of states that are doing this. Texas right now is piloting risk limiting audits. So there's a lot of movement in that direction.
Exactly.
I think people are seeing it as a benchmark.
I think we lost Susan there for a
There she
second.
is.
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay, good. I
I'm
was just
sorry,
like,
my internet is unstable, so I might go off camera. I didn't know I bounced off. But I wanted to add a little bit more to that. And thank you so much, Pam, for the complete explanation of it. It's fantastic that Maryland is moving in this direction. But I'm also going to be an advocate that's, always striving for better and better. And I think that Maryland needs to, like most of the states, as Pam said, they go through pilots, they go through practice sessions trying to understand because there's certain procedures that need to be in place to be able to conduct these types of audits. You can't just fall out of bed and start doing these audits. So one thing that right now, it's not going to be every contest on the ballot. They're going to be selected. And if there's a really closely contested election, you want to see that one being audited. So I think one thing that Maryland could look to do in the future is expand the number of contests that are going to be audited on the ballot. And that might be something to think about going forward, to have more comprehensive checking of all the votes.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, now we've kind of got into a little bit of the overall picture here, and now I just want to focus on something that's been in the news a lot recently. Let's talk about a little bit about mail-in voting a little bit here, and I think one of the things is that the 2020 election, COVID, really showed I'd say. I like to there are seminal moments in election history, and they've been a lot in the last 20 years, 25 years or so, like that from Hava forward here. And 2020 was one of the bigger ones here because you had before COVID, it was about 5 to 6% of the population would vote by mail, and it was considered more absentee voting. And it was no excuse or anything like that because most times you had to vote in person, and so the percentage of it was, like I said, 5 to 6%. COVID, of course, was an anomaly right then and there. So you had, the primary in Maryland as 100% vote by mail. The even the general election was like a 50% vote by mail standard here, and then subsequently. We have now seen that it's taken hold. A lot of people have really enjoyed vote by mail. And in the last election in 24, if you in the primary, it was the second choice. It was voting in person on election day was about 40%. The vote by mail in the primary was 40%, and 20% voted early in the primary election. And then in the general election, it was about a third, a third, a third across the board there. Roughly speaking, with still more people wanting to vote in person on election day, but it's kind of seeing its popularity, and we have not established its benchmark quite yet, but it seems to getting closer and closer to it. So I think the first part about this is let's before we go into like how other methods are being delivered here, but let's talk about ballot security with the vote by mail process overall, and basically the effects of some of the proposed federal changes that are being discussed at this level.
Yeah. Well, I am always going to be something of a fan of vote by mail. I happen to live on the West Coast, where a lot of states are mostly or all vote by mail. And what that means for us is that we send out a mail ballot to every voter who's registered. You can vote that ballot at your kitchen table and mail it in. You can vote it at your kitchen table and drop it off in a drop box. You can bring it to a polling place, because we do still have those. Usually they're vote centers, so you can vote from anywhere in the county. Or you can vote in person if you want to in the actual polling place. So you have all these options, and because you have those options, it makes it more convenient for voters. Another thing that often happens with vote by mail is allowing some extra time for ballots to arrive, because we never quite know for sure what's happening at the post office. And if for some reason you mailed your ballot on time and it was postmarked timely, but it didn't get to the elections office on time, your ballot should still be counted, is how we see it. Late arriving ballots aren't a super huge number, but they were enough of the ballots that were rejected before we passed that law in California, to say, no, we should capture these additional ballots and count them for voters. So it's a very voter-centered way of looking at elections, which I appreciate. When you have large quantities of vote by mail like that, and it's not something you sort of just come to recently, there's usually some standards and practices that are in place. Ballot tracking is really important. Ballot tracking lets voters know that their ballot is on its way to them. It lets the voter know when it's been received back to the elections office. It lets them know when it was counted. And that's really reassuring for voter confidence, just having that window into the process. And it lets you check if for some reason it hasn't gotten to you yet, or it hasn't gotten to them yet. And that's a really important thing. We check eligibility of voters before sending a vote by mail ballot, but we also check the signature on the ballot envelope before we process it when it comes back in. And that signature verification is something that ensures that it's that actual voter whose signature is on file is the person that's sending that ballot. Being California, a lot of times we get accused of having people who are not eligible voting, but that is an actual safeguard to, get rid of that complaint. There's different ways to do that checking. Some counties do a better job than others, but we also let voters cure a problem, meaning correct if they failed to sign, or if there's something strange about their signature, we notify the voter and they can resolve that. So all of that is very voter-centered. And some of those processes, you couldn't put those in place in 2020 when you suddenly had to pivot to vote by mail. But they're good things to have as you move forward, especially with this larger percentage of voters who are adopting vote by mail now.
I might jump in and maybe give some. I moved to a different place. Hopefully, the internet is more stable here. To give some suggestions for voters in Maryland when voting by mail. There's a couple different ways you can get your ballot. I'm basically going to channel a little bit of Jared right now to explain how that works, but you may know that you can get your ballot by requesting it. You can request your ballot online, and then potentially you can also get your ballot online through a web delivery system. When you get your ballot online through the web delivery system, there will be some other steps that the system will ask you to take, including putting information on the outside of the ballot so it can be processed more quickly. You make sure that you sign the oath, and that's done. Otherwise, you might have to come back and cure it. But when those ballots come in, also they need to be remade so that they can be put into a scanner. So this puts another step that needs to be done at the elections office in between your ballot being counted. So as a best practice, as an advocate, I would recommend not getting your ballot on the web, instead getting the ballot sent to you from the ballot package, because then you will have your ballot when it comes in to the election office. It will have, it will be the right size. First of all, it will be noted that it is a ballot in the post office, so they can process it more quickly and move it along. So you're more likely to get your ballot back in time. When it comes into the election office, it can be sorted and scanned from a barcode to make sure that you're who you are and that your ballot is correct, that you get credit for having voted. And it can move more quickly through the process, and it doesn't have to be remade. If you're using a web delivery system, there's a lot more that goes into it, and for the individual voter, the recommendation would be to get the paper ballots that you can return that when you're considering how to vote by mail. Of course, if it's last minute, maybe you want to use the online system, avail yourself of the online system so you can get your ballot in on time. But if you have the time, try and use the original ballot because it moves through the system a little bit more smoothly for you.
100% agree. And also on the question of, executive orders or proposed executive orders, some states are moving to like eliminate that late arrival window. I don't think that makes sense. If you voted timely, you're not voting late. You're not trying to vote after election day. If your ballot was submitted by election day to the post office, and that's on there with a postmark, then it should be counted, even if it arrives a few days late. And one group of voters for whom this is especially important is military and overseas voters, because they're farther away, they're remote voting. They rely on being able to get that ballot back in time to be counted. And it's much different for them than it is for somebody who lives down the street from a post office locally. And for them, they're the reason that most of those late arrival windows were put in place in the first place, so that military voters are not being disenfranchised by too short of a window to participate. Now, the window is longer now. You send out ballots earlier to them than before, but it still can make a difference if you're trying to get a ballot back from, Afghanistan or someplace. It makes a big difference having that. So I disagree with anything that shortens that window for voters. And vote by mail generally is you're marking a physical ballot. You get to check it, and once you seal it up and send it back, that is the record of your vote. You had a chance to verify it, and that matters. So those are secure ballots, just like in-person ballots.
Excellent. Yeah. So I guess along the lines there was other topics for the executive orders that were out there because there was a lot on the security of the systems and making sure the barcodes and everything. But again, it was more of this idea of paper ballots. So can you, I guess, if you want to take some time before we go into probably our last question or two, and then open it up, just your thoughts on all the executive order that was issued on this one here and possibly the proposed one as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Go ahead,
Oh,
Susan. I'll follow
yeah.
up.
So the executive order, there was an executive order issued in March that directed different agencies to do different things. And there was one provision in it that has already been challenged and defeated in the courts, which was regarding it directed the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, which is responsible for producing and distributing the federal voter registration form, which is there's also states have their own voter registration forms, but they create and maintain the federal one. And it said that it was going that when it was submitted that a prospective voter would have to include documentary proof of citizenship, meaning a birth certificate or a passport, which a lot of people don't have, or doesn't match their name. If you're a married woman, your birth certificate probably isn't the same as your name right now. So this was challenged in court by the Brennan Center and the League of Women Voters. Shout out to League of Women Voters, who won a tremendous victory in defeating that section of it, where the court found that the president doesn't have the authority to direct the U.S. Election Assistance Commission to do this because for a couple of reasons. One being that the Constitution doesn't give the president any authority over elections, and two, the U.S. Election Assistance Commission is an independent agency. It's actually an agency that was constituted by Congress to be independent, to not be constituted under the executive branch. There is another provision in that executive order that directs the U.S. Election Assistance Commission to change the federal voluntary voting system guidelines to ban barcodes on ballots for the counting and recording and counting of votes. And that is something that you see commonly on ballot marking devices or any assistive technology. The U.S. Election Assistance Commission actually started the process to make changes to the federal voting system guidelines. Now, keep in mind the federal voting system guidelines are called the voluntary voting system guidelines because they are keyword voluntary. States can opt to use them or not. You can choose to have your system certified by the U.S. Election Assistance Commission to the federal voting system guidelines, or you can do what Maryland does, which is says we're going to incorporate those guidelines into our certification process, and we're going to require systems meet those guidelines, but you don't actually have to have EAC do it. It can be done through another way, but of course the vendors, it's much more cost effective for them to just certify at the EAC and then it's certified for everybody. They began that process. They got a lot of pushback from some of the election officials that were on some of their advisory committees about doing this. And they were unable to move forward with the timeline that the EAC, the chair of the EAC is currently, there's 4 commissioners at the EAC, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. They rotate leadership. There's currently a Republican in leadership, and he was leading the effort to change the guidelines in accordance with the executive order. Right now it's essentially stalled, but the commissioners have, one of the other Republican commissioners has said that they plan to move ahead anyway with the executive order, and that they may also be decertifying equipment that is outdated or reach end of life software, which is a whole other issue. Because mass decertification of election equipment be in a, without any notice, without any policies in place, could cause a lot of disruption and potentially chaos before the election. So this is something that we at Free Speech for People are keeping a very close eye on. Additionally, that section of the executive order that I mentioned regarding the barcodes was not challenged by the Brennan Center and the League of Women Voters lawsuit. So the court's ruling so far has been silent on that part of it since it wasn't part of the pleadings. But it is being challenged in a separate lawsuit in Oregon and Washington state. So I would, if I was a betting person, I would bet the court comes up with a similar decision like the one did in the league's decision, saying actually the president doesn't have the authority to cause any of this to happen or tell any of this to happen. The president has also threatened or signaled that he was going to issue another executive order, but I think that was before the defeat. So I don't know if it will, we'll see what happens with that. But kind of getting a little bit weedy, but I thought people might want to know.
Yeah. I had heard somebody who's a former Justice Department attorney in civil rights say, essentially it's a glorified press release. The authority isn't there to make these changes. That doesn't mean the EAC won't try or that there won't be efforts in states to do some of the things that are being discussed. On the QR codes or barcodes, what you want is for voters to be able to verify their ballot. The human readable text that's printed on the ballot is the part they can verify. They can't see into a barcode or QR code, so that's not verifiable by a human. And it's not a bad thing to eliminate that encoding if it makes it simpler, more direct for voters to verify, right? So it's okay, but there has to be an orderly process. There are vendors now who make systems that do not incorporate this encoding of your choices. It's just straightforward, your choices on the ballot that you can read and understand. And in Colorado in 2019, they eliminated the use of QR codes on ballots. Their main vendor modified their software to make a ballot marking device able to do that. They print marked ballots that look identical to ballots that are hand marked by voters. That's great. But they were able to make that choice, and they were able to make those changes. And, regardless of whether your state adheres to the voluntary guidelines or not, it would create a lot of disruption to do it the way that was proposed in the order.
And I'll just say, just 100% agree with everything Pam said. And Free Speech for People is also, we've for a long time taken the position that we should not be using voting machines that record votes and barcodes well before this executive order came out. And I think it was in 2019, the Secretary of State of Colorado issued a rule that said we're not going to use these machines that use barcodes anymore. I think Pam referenced. And she was and is a Democrat. So this is an interesting policy because it is being perceived as a MAGA, perhaps, oh my God, if it's coming from this state, it must be have some suppression element to it. But I don't think that's really the case in this situation. It's not, it's a little bit more nuanced or involved. And there's also been, there was a bill in Georgia last year which sought to eliminate barcodes, and that was a bipartisan. So it's a very, it's like I said, sometimes it gets a little complicated. It's not always so black and white.
Yeah.
So we found ourselves
Yeah.
to weirdly on the side of that part of the executive order. Sorry, Chairman, even though we don't agree with them doing
so I think
it.
we'll have one more question here, and then we'll open it up for everyone here. And it kind of Susan, the last point there is kind of where I want to go with it as well. Election administration historically has always been a bipartisan. They've been, as an election official, we're referees, right? Like we line the field, all the combatants come onto the field, they do their job, and then, but we just basically just, make sure that it's, the same. Everyone understands the rules of the game, and you go in there. Now, almost election administration and everything is viewed in a very partisan context. And, just take a look at Eric, for example, right? Which is, it was supposed, it started off as a bipartisan effort for states to get together to make sure that their roles are up to date and accurate. And now that is a very partisan concept because of membership, and it has turned into a red versus blue idea. With that, it has kind of been a part of this idea of free and fair elections as well, has always been a part of the American law and democracy, at least since the Civil War and beyond. But right now, I'd say that confidence in the system is perpetually being challenged, and it is, by the way, also it's not just I would say just with election officials, but it talks about election judges and poll workers being challenged and being, a part of, I guess, whatever theory is being kind of pushed at the time here. So what factors you believe are contributing to this decline in confidence and the rise of partisanship in our U.S. voting system?
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Pam.
I feel like this is such a critical point. For a long time, we didn't think too much about how this worked. Yeah, we had Florida in 2000 that led to the Help America Vote Act. We, adjusted some things in how the country does elections and election administration. 2016, you mentioned, where now there's, foreign entities actually trying to break into voter registration systems, and cybersecurity a really big deal. Always voter confidence has risen and fallen depending on who won the most recent election, right? That's a normal kind of thing. People feel better about the election if their person won, and not so great about it if their person didn't win. But I remember being asked by reporters in 2016, what do you make of all of this discussion of election rigging? And I said, it's the first time I've heard about election rigging before an election was even happening, right? It's not, oh, this election was rigged, past tense, you could see because I didn't win or whatever. But literally before, there was discussion of it would be rigged. And that was a harbinger of something to come. I think there have been occasions where people have doubt. I always think about the work that we do, and I think Susan may agree with this, that our job is not to create confidence, but our job is to create the evidence base, put the systems in place and the policies in place that give a foundation for justified confidence, that all of us can know, win or lose, who actually won, and walk away going, well, it isn't my favorite outcome, but now I know we've just got to campaign harder next time. But have that confidence. The job of elections is not to convince the winner that they won, but the loser that they lost, and their supporters too. And so that's why this sort of evidence-based elections is so critical. You know, if we can't have that fact-based approach to how we do elections, we're in a world of hurt. Voters will keep trying to vote because voters want to participate. They want that opportunity to be part of the civic process and to be part of democracy. In this last election, we had folks calling the election protection hotline going, why can't I vote? There's no polling place open near me. Well, their state wasn't actually having an election right then. But that's how badly they wanted to participate because they knew there was elections somewhere. That's a really positive sign to me. The one way to be sure your vote won't count is not to show up. So regardless of the system, you've got to try. Where I think Maryland is doing really well is moving to these much more secure, much more evidence-based opportunities.
Yeah, well, Pam stole a lot of my answer because I wanted to talk about having evidence-based elections. So I'll just tag on to that and say, I think that we as citizens, this is a participatory democracy. Our elections are ours. So I think that citizens have the right and responsibility to know that to participate in the process. And so first, show up to vote. That's the number one thing, to have confidence that you're going to have a voice. The best way to have confidence in your voice is to show up to vote. To have post-election audits. I'm going to say something now that might make Jared cringe a little bit, but not to be afraid to call for recounts, because that's the best way to go back to that original ballot of record. I know election officials always are like, I don't want to do a recount, but it is a good way to show to the voters who won the election. We're calling for free speech for people, destigmatize their recounts, and I know that might. I'll give you some Tums afterwards, Jared. I don't mean to give you heartburn. But because we want people to have the evidence that their elections are correct. And I'm going to steal from Pam and say the other thing you can do is become a poll worker and then participate, because I know that she says that all the time and she didn't say it now, so I stole it.
Well, yeah, thank you for that little plug there. We always need poll workers. And I was if no one said it at the end here, I was gonna be like, and everyone, there's a couple of things, before I turn this back over to Gail and Nikki. I just want to say, well, thank you, Pam and Susan, for this lively discussion here. I just want to, everyone in the audience here, make sure that you're registered to vote. Come to the State Board of Elections website. Just make sure your information is up to date. And, we're now actively recruiting for poll workers and election judges. Training is going to be starting very soon for our June 23rd election. So, please, we always need more people. So sign up. We've increased the pay to $250 a day. So I've been working with the General Assembly a lot on that. It's been great. And if you have, we also do election pages. So 14 and 15-year-olds, they can participate and help out with the process, and we can have election judges as young as 16. They can't vote, but they can help us, with our democracy. So it's very important that when you go into any of your schools or anything like that, to help us recruit that as well, and making sure that also the youth are registered to vote as well. But so with that, I want to thank our panelists and Gail and Nikki for putting this together here. And we'll have about, I think, about 10 minutes for Q&A from the audience. So do I turn it back over to Nikki here?
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you. Thanks, Jared. So I'm going to try and prioritize questions in the last 10 minutes. We got quite a few questions about the mail-in ballot case in front of the Supreme Court. This is for all three of you. If you can talk about the security of mail-in ballots, chain of custody sort of thing. And then also, Jared, if you could talk about the implications if the Supreme Court does rule that you can't do mail-in ballots, how would that affect Maryland, where we have like a 20% rate of mail-in ballot use?
I gotta say, I think mail-in balloting is an integral part of our elections. I don't think you unwind that. I think there would be massive voter revolt. The entire state of Washington, the entire state of Oregon, the entire state of California, the entire state of Colorado, the entire state of Utah, you know, not just blue states, red states too, and a whole bunch of other states do massive amounts of vote by mail. And it's safe, it's secure. No one has demonstrated that it is not. I think that's a really important fact. And also, I will say, mail-in voting, having the opportunity to vote by mail is the antidote to this sort of rise in, you know, hey, what if we voted online? Which would be a really terrible and dangerous thing. Some states allow some of it. No state allows it for all voters because it's a terrible and dangerous thing. Because those ballots cannot be effectively recounted or audited because you have no way to know if what the ballot that got to the election official even represented what you thought it did. So being able to vote remotely means you have to vote by mail if you're going to have a secure and secret and private ballot. So yeah, I don't think they do away with it. But I will say that there are ways to secure vote by mail ballots. And you said something really important, Nikki, which is chain of custody. All this evidence in evidence-based elections is like evidence in a court case. There has to be chain of custody. It has to be secured, whether it's a physical paper ballot, whether it's a voting machine, whether, you know, it's any of the you know, memory devices or any of the parts of the whole process. All of that has to be secured. You have to track it. You have to transport it securely. You have to store it securely. No one should have access to that who has no reasonable right to have access to it. Only election officials who've sworn an oath to uphold elections. But having chain of custody is important, whether it's mail-in ballots, whether it's ballots in a drop box, whether it's ballots in person in a polling place. You need it regardless. So it's not different, it's just a different pathway.
Jared, do you want to hop in?
Yeah, I was going to let you go. If not, I just want to say a couple of things about this here. One, yes, this would have it would have a massive impact on voters because at one point here, where there's two things. It's the Mississippi case that is going to currently being decided right now about whether or not it has to be received back by election day. And so the Supreme Court will make a determination by sometime before the next general election. We're thinking in June of next year. But there's other aspects to this too, which is the postmark. The U.S. Postal Service has now changed how it's doing its postmark, and a lot of this now is basically changing our voter outreach with more education, with mail-in voting. So before, I would say it was just easy. Just drop it in the mailbox before election day. It's going to get postmarked before election day. Now, as it gets closer and closer to election day, the use of a drop box might rise, and because we know that one of they're safe and secure, and that they get picked up by election officials, bipartisan teams pick them up and bring them directly into the office, so that you know that they would be received. So there's a little bit now nuanced communication with mail-in voting. So we start mailing them out about 43 days before the election. to domestic voters, 45 days before the election to overseas and military voters, UOCAVA voters there. And so, as it gets closer and closer to election time here, that postmark aspect, which is not being really, that's not debated on the legal end there, could have a little bit of an impact on the ones that are cast on that same day. So, if instead of going to the mailbox, on election day, most likely I would be saying to individuals, you might want to go to a drop box in order to do this. So, we're making sure we're keeping up to date on that. And for the confidence in the system here, yes, this is one of the things that a voter can call up. They can track their ballot from when it was mailed out to their mailbox. And then if they put it back into the mail stream, they can track it from when it gets into the mail stream all the way to the local board of elections. The local board of elections notifies, we notify every voter that votes by mail that the ballot has been received and that then it's been counted as well. So the entire process is transparent and ensures voter confidence in the system, that they know where it is. So I think that this could have some impact on Marylanders, not because of the fact that right now we have over 600,000 people that are on our permanent mail-in ballot list. So those are just that normal, and then you get another 200 to 250,000 that would take it on any given election day. So you're up to 850,000 people that that are impacted by any sort of changes in this ballot.
Yeah. I just want to say in Cuyahoga County in Ohio, in Ohio, the Senate passed a bill that would restrict this window, right? Not allow late arriving ballots, etc. And it hasn't passed both chambers, but they have calculated from the last election that 3,000 ballots in one county would have been thrown out if this bill became law, if it had already become law from this last election. 3,000. That's enough to sway an election. So it's really important that voters have that opportunity. And if it's dicey about getting it postmarked in time, Dropbox is your friend.
I am going to ask one more question. It's up to y'all how long you take to answer it. Given that Maryland does not have voter ID laws, there seems to be a lack of confidence in the security of elections. In your opinion, what state has the gold standard of voter security when it comes to that? And how do we allow people to feel confident again in the voter roll process and the voter ID process here in Maryland?
I can answer that part. I think that Maryland you can have complete confidence in the voter system right now. It is the policy of the General Assembly to increase voter access and not have artificial barriers in place with voter registration. And, we are making sure that we have automatic voter registration with motor vehicles and the health exchange. We, increase, participation with colleges and with other government agencies as well. We're trying to make sure that the data, once they hit one, moves over to the voter registration database seamlessly so that voters can participate in our democracy. I think there's a difference here that, what we talk about here is, this is a constitutional right. And Maryland has made a policy determination not to create any barriers to that constitutional right.
Yeah, I think it's really important to note that some groups are more likely to be impacted by a voter ID requirement. People who have ID think, well, this is commonplace, everyone must have this, but that's not the case. People ages 70 and over, only 21%, 21% of them lack a valid, accurate driver's license. That's a big chunk of voters. African American voters, it's 21%. Also, Hispanic people, it's 23%. There are a lot of people, whether you're part of those groups or not, who simply don't have that type of ID, and it's very difficult and challenging for them to get it. So, given the really minute amount of voter fraud that would happen in in-person voting, and I would even argue that it's usually not fraud, it's accidental. It seems like a solution in search of a problem.
Well, perfect. Well, it's 8 o'clock, so I want to respect everybody's time. I know that there was only about 20 other questions I didn't get to. So I have saved the chat, everybody, and I am willing to work with Jared to get some answers to those. And I just want to thank Susan and Pamela for making the time to join us today. Really, really appreciate it. And this recording will be available on YouTube and our website very shortly. Yes, thank you, everyone. So yeah, thanks so much. And with that, I will say good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Jared.
Thanks.